I'm Ken Welch. I'm a third generation St. Pete resident. Grew up here, went to Lakewood High School, and my intro into the arts was in the gas plant at our church. I played in band at Bay Point under Mr. Green, and then at Lakewood under Mr. Van Dyson. And those bonds, are still with me to this day. And those friendships and being able to work together, all those things, showed me I lived why the arts are really, necessary as a part of education and growth in the community. Where we are in the city, we've made a lot of progress, but we're at a point where the decisions we make are going to determine whether we retain what made St. Pete great, that authenticity, that funkiness, that affordability, that accessibility. All those things matter. And that's really, I've lived that. I've lived, the displacement of the gas plant. My granddad's wood yard was displaced for the interstate. Our church was displaced, that same church where I learned how to play for baseball. And so now is a time for us to live our values, not just talk about equity, not just talk about sustainability and the importance of the arts and youth programs and affordability, but to actually be intentional about it. So for years, I have worked with the arts community, with Creative Pinellas, with the St. Pete Arts Alliance. I've always supported funding for the arts, not just those brick and mortar, but I knew working with the arts community and later becoming a member of Creative Pinellas, that a lot of those dollars, even if it's grant, funded, don't get down to support the people that are actually producing the art. And so I've asked, even back in 2017, when there was an arts summit, I said, what's your strategic vision? You've got to have a plan and an ask, of what you're going to do with that money and what your priorities are as an arts community. And then I would fully support it as a commissioner. So I think if we get that lined up, things like the San Francisco, artist stipend that we just talked about, that could easily come out of that pool of money. So to me, at my level as a policymaker, is identify the funding and come to agreement with the arts community of how that should be allocated. The big guys are going to get, the Dolly, the Arts and Crafts Museum, they've got their allocations. Even the St. Pete Museum of History got almost 3 million. But what are we doing to get those dollars down to the artists? So the funding source that makes sense to me is that bed tax. And while everybody's going to be asking for their piece of it, right? So I think that's the best path, but the arts community has to be speaking in one accord, making that ask and lining up, right? And being heard as the Phillies are coming asking for a new stadium, the Rays are coming asking for funding. Arts community's voice has to be heard in that process. And I've been working on that for years and very supportive of that source of funding. First job was at my granddad's wood yard, which was at the gas plant site. We're a couple of generations out of poverty ourselves. And so I watched him work every day. I know what it's like to have to depend on your own innovation to get out of bed every morning. I watched him do that. And I watched my father as well. He had a business for some 40 years, Welch Accounting and Tax Service, just a couple of blocks south on 16th Street. And I worked there as a kid. I worked there until Dad passed away in 2013. But yeah, I know what it's like to have to make a payroll. I know what it's like to not take pay during bad times. And so, yeah, we've lived that as a family. And also as a musician, I've been a musician in several local churches. So I know a lot of musicians, and I know for everything they bring to the community, it's not a lot of pay. And so, yeah, I do know the struggles of artists. And that's one reason that I'm so committed to making sure that we, as we're doing everything else in the county, from stadiums to facilities, that we actually do have something in place to support our artists, whether it's a stipend or making sure we've got affordable housing for artists, even if it requires, modifying our land development regulations. It's got to be a holistic approach. But having lived that background, both as a small business person and as a musician, I absolutely understand. And what I have done as a commissioner is be intentional and make it a priority and bring urgency to making affordable housing the process work better. And so there are three pieces in my view. One is we have to have certain subsidies. And so as a county commissioner, I led the effort, in fact, in '06, and we did a community housing study countywide. It included folks from St. Pete. We looked at how many folks were cost burdened, what was the price of housing in the county. It looked a lot like it looks today, as a matter of fact, whereas too many folks are having to double up, triple up in apartments, can't, come up with a down payment. And so we created the Housing Trust Fund and seeded it with $20 million. And over the years, we've added to that. So it's now over $100 million. And so the first 440 units of affordable housing are being built right now, drawing down that money. Those are all affordable to folks making $19 an hour and less, folks making 80% AMI, area median income, and less. And that's made possible because they're pulling from that pot of $100 million that we put in place as a county when I was on the commission. They're pulling those dollars down to subsidize it and to keep it affordable for the long term. At least 99 years is what we normally have in our contracts. And that's what we need to continue to do, to be intentional about putting as much affordable housing on the ground that we can now to kind of offset what's happening with the market rate housing. And so it's that subsidy. It's also our processes, making sure we expedite planning and permitting. I want to do that as mayor. And then we need to look at our regulations as well. And what we can do is expedite the process for affordable housing. And so there are things we can do with our regulations, with our processes, and with subsidies. I've done that as a commissioner. I want to be intentional about doing that as mayor as well. It will be a priority. I'm a guitarist and saxophonist and drummer, but I'm also an accountant and a commissioner. So I don't know if I've got like a middle brain or something, I don't know, but the process is way too complicated. I had this very conversation when we were trying to distribute CARES Act money last year from the government, and the process was so complicated that folks would just give up. And so we worked to simplify that. We worked to have navigators to help folks go through the process. And part of what I talked about in the previous question is I want to do business process improvement in all of our city departments and look at it from a customer's perspective. That's got to be our focus going forward. And just have a regular person look at a process and say, would a normal person be able to navigate that if they're not super motivated to do so, if it's not life and death? Are we making it so complicated and so loaded down with government lingo and terms that people don't even understand that folks give up? That's the way I want to approach this, to make it truly usable. We did the same thing with the small business enterprise program at the county. It was supposed to carve out business for small and minority businesses, but it only was achieving about $70,000 out of a $400 million bucket of goods and services. And so we said, something's wrong. We went out intentionally and in partnership with Renee Flowers, who was a school board member, Lisa Willa Bowman from the city. So we brought the city, the county, and the school board together. We went to Lakewood High School and we brought businesses in and said, tell us what barriers you're facing. And they told us, and we were able to tweak the program, not tweak it, overhaul it. We made it clear in the organization that this was a priority. In 2 years, we increased that program from 70,000 going to that group of businesses to $20 million. Say that again, 70,000 to 20 million, just by being intentional and talking to the customer, right? And eliminating those barriers. So that's exactly the approach I want to take, whether it's grants or whether it's, plans and permits. We need to look at our processes and make it efficient for the customer. I've been an artist, a musician, since I was a schoolboy. So I know the work that goes into it. I know from doing my, hour a day of saxophone practice as a Bay Point kid, how much goes into it. It's not something that just pops up one day and you're an artist. It's a part of your soul. It's part of your life. It's not just, not just a job. And I totally get that. And I, for a long time, as I said earlier, have advocated carving out a dedicated funding source to support arts and the artists that make that art possible. So yeah, absolutely see you, not only from you being artists and having that I think, God-given ability to produce something that no one else can produce. But also I see you uh, as business people. You know, you are running enterprises, right? And I know how much blood, sweat, and tears goes into that as well. So I think I'm going to bring all that to the table as a mayor, not only in making sure that we find a way to finally carve out a funding source. And it's really embarrassing, quite frankly, because when I was on the commission and we took this up, we had, you know, I think it was the year I was chair, either 2013 or 18. We had a comparison with other counties in Florida and even other cities like Sarasota and Tampa put more into the arts than we do as a county. And those charts are out there; they're part of public record. And so we know we have to catch up. What we're doing now has been kind of incremental, you know, with a grant program here, you know, funding for some capital project there, and those have been pretty big. But we've got to get that plan in place. This is our approach and strategy of supporting the arts, from the big facilities to the individual artists. And to me, that is how you move to getting that funding carved out. So I've kind of done this before, you know, looked at something new, brought folks together and said, this is a way we can address this. And now you've got the South St. Pete CRA. And that's another thing I want to refine. But there are grants available. Housing is a part of the CRA as well, workforce development. So if you go to the city website and just put in South St. Pete CRA, you can see their grant process, and that's how you can apply through that. And we follow that up with the Lellman CRA and now the Clearwater Greenwood CRA, which are all poverty-based, the first ever in Pinellas County's history. And so we can also have the first ever allocation for the arts in Pinellas County history based on that same model of leadership and partnership. So what's the number? What's the stipend we're asking for, and just do the math on it. And that way I know what to work for and looking at all these funding sources. But the concept makes good sense to me.